Hello and welcome back to Curiosity Mine. I'm running a little bit behind at the moment due to circumstances beyond my control, so this is a bit of an unplanned video. I also don't know how interesting this is going to be because it's going to be another test of my ability to make a video out of mostly nothing. But anyway, many years ago, I made a video wherein we visited a tiny town called Pokataroo, and I talked about how the decision was made to cut the Pokataroo railway line short instead of leading it into the town of Collarenebri, which probably had a huge impact on the history of northern New South Wales. There's links to that video up there and down there. In the 6 years since I posted that video, 6 years, wow. In the 6 years since I posted that video, I've had some feedback, including a couple of people who've gotten in touch to tell me their own personal connections with the Pokataroo Railway, and more specifically with the Pokataroo Station Master's house, which used to sit somewhere around here, adjacent to the station building, which also no longer exists at Pokataroo. One person provided a bit of background on the house and its history, and someone else reached out to tell me that they grew up in Pokataroo in the Station Master's house. So I thought I'd make a quick video about the Station Master's house because I have a personal connection to the Station Master's house too. Because I grew up in it too. So this is going to be a challenging story to tell because I'm not really going to show you the house in great detail because my family still lives in it to this day and I need to respect their privacy. It's also a difficult story because there's a lot of holes in it that I haven't been able to fill up with facts. So I haven't been able to find as much historical information as I would like about the house itself, which is kind of annoying, especially from the perspective of making a compelling YouTube video about the subject. But what I can tell you is that the house stood near the Pokataroo railway station until after the closure of the railway line in 1974. And to my understanding, it was purchased in the late 1980s to early 1990s and moved to its current location, which is not far from its original location at Pokataroo. There is a concrete slab beneath the house in its current location that is dated 1992, so at least I do know when some of the foundation was laid. And it's the relocation and renovation of the house that's kind of sad and disappointing if you're interested in railway history or early 20th century architecture, because it was renovated very extensively when it was relocated to the point that it's no longer recognisable as a period building. Apart from a few really obscure and almost unnoticeable hints, it really just looks like a typical house built in the late 1980s or early 1990s with contemporary lining and fittings. Some of the information I've received since posting that first video about Pokataroo is about the structure and layout of the Station Master's house. A good source has informed me that the house itself is largely unchanged and has only had an extended veranda added to it. I suspect that there might be more to it than that because the interior of the house has two very obvious parts to it. There's an old end with some very densely packed bedrooms, and there's a wider, more open plan end with a kitchen and living room that looks a lot like a modern addition, maybe in the 1980s when the house was rebuilt, or maybe it was a repurposing of a different space from the original layout. So, period features. The most boring period feature that still remains are the floorboards, which are not only obviously very old, but they're also not consistent from one end of the house to the other, which I think is evidence that the house has been extended and modified a bit into its current form. Another clue is that the walls in the older part of the house have lath strips beneath the modern plaster, which is not at all consistent with the building style of the late 1980s or with the newer parts of the house that have been added on beyond the original framework. Lath walls are made of very thin, narrow strips of timber over which plaster would be spread. In the case of this house, the walls are now covered with gyprock or drywall, whatever you choose to call it, and the internal structures of the walls are covered up. I know from doing some renovations and patching and repairs over the years that the walls in the older end of the house are definitely old school construction. The house also has very high ceilings, which is appropriate for a house from the railway era. So this is the part of the video where I remind you that Patreon is a thing, and if you're interested in maybe supporting Curiosity Mine through Patreon, then that would make you an awesome person and you get your name on this list up here with these awesome people. Patreon.com/CuriosityMine, the link's in the description. If that's your thing, go for it. You're amazing. If it's not your thing, you're still amazing anyway. Thanks. And another old-timey feature that's still here is the transom window over the front door. This is definitely not a common feature on a modern house. It's very unlikely that this would have been added in the 80s or the 90s, and it's very likely to be the original door frame and the original transom window from the railway house from the 1900s. And the last thing is one that I'm not as certain about, but it's pretty compelling nonetheless. When we moved into the house in 1995, among the items that the previous owners had left behind was a pile of sash window weights. If you're not familiar with them, sash window weights sit inside the wooden frame of a sash window to offset the weight of the window pane and make it easier to raise and lower the glass. It is totally possible that these weights did not come from the original windows in the house. Maybe the previous owner found them somewhere else, but it seems awfully coincidental that a house that would have originally had vintage sash windows has a stack of old sash window weights lying around. I'm pretty confident that these are relics from the building's history. So if we accept that this is the original Pokataroo Station Master's house, which very much seems to be the case, we need to wonder about a bunch of things, like why would anyone take a period house and rebuild it into a perfectly normal modern building, for the 1980s at least, removing every single redeeming period feature from it in the process? I assume it must have been a good deal at the time, and the renovations must have been financially worthwhile. And I also assume that the building probably wasn't in a livable condition when it was bought and relocated. It may have just been a frame, but there still seems to have been a tremendous amount of work done to alter it and convert it from a house built not long after 1906 to a normal 1980s house. Either way, regardless of my thoughts about erasing period features and how people might choose to renovate houses, I guess it's a good thing that the building is at least somehow preserved, even if it's in a bit of a ship of Theseus kind of situation. So yeah, thank you for indulging a bit of my personal story about my connection to the Pokataroo Station Master's house, one of the houses that I grew up in, and thank you to everyone who has helped to fill in little bits and pieces of this story. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you check out Collarenebri, the railway that never was, about the history of the Pokataroo line and how northwestern New South Wales could have been very different if that railway line was just a little bit longer. And thank you for watching.